Hello and welcome to another session of Informally Formal. I'm back with one of my favorites, Dr. Mustafizur Rahman, Distinguished Fellow at CPD, Center for Policy Dialogue. As you have heard me talk about him in our past sessions, Dr. Rahman was an academic, taught at Dhaka University for several decades, I believe. He was also the executive director of CPD for about a decade, and someone that needs no introduction. So welcome to our show again, Dr. Rahman.
Thank you. Very happy to be with you.
So our today's topic is the RCEP, which is Regional Comprehensive Economic Cooperation. RCEP, which is ASEAN, 10 countries of the ASEAN bloc, and 5 countries of Japan, South Korea, China, Australia, and New Zealand. India is abstaining for the time being. So 10 plus 5 countries, that pretty much represents 1/3 of the world population and 1/3 of the world economy. So I'll go straight to you, Dr. Rahman. This was been in the works for about 8-9 years, as you know, since it was first floated, but then recently got inked in Vietnam on November 15th. Now, the entire world is talking about it. I'm going to give a little bit of a background for our audience, as I've discussed with you, Dr. Rahman. On the one hand, the world is kind of moving away. Some of the Western world countries are moving away from multilateralism into more inward-looking protectionism, while we see, quite to the contrary, here in the Southeast, and now with the further expansion through RCEP, the ASEAN bloc is doing rather well slowly but surely, over the decades. Your views on that and the importance of it, Dr. Rahman, please.
Thank you. I think you have very rightly mentioned that RCEP has been, the negotiations has been there since 2012. In fact, it has taken about 8 years to negotiate. But on the other hand, you are also right in pointing out that multilateralism has been losing its traction, and we are seeing that WTO is becoming increasingly dysfunctional. In view of that, and in the context of COVID also, countries are pursuing protectionist policies. But at the same time, we are also seeing the rise of the mega regionals. Those mega regionals, I think, are perceived to be alternative options by many countries to the WTO. But at the same time, they also understand that if they are alone, unilateralism will not give the results that they want in terms of preferential market access, in terms of deepening cooperation, in terms of taking advantage of their comparative strengths. So we see that in recent times we have seen, for example, the US has renegotiated the NAFTA. So USMCA is a mega regional in recent times. Then we have the although the TPP could not be signed because US opted out, but we have the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership in its place, the CPTPP. And now we see that, as you have rightly mentioned, 10 countries of the ASEAN FTA plus 5 countries with which ASEAN in fact had bilateral free trade agreement before. Now they have come under one umbrella. And as you have rightly mentioned, India was also very much in the negotiations between 2012 and 2019 when it decided to opt out, and we can discuss why. But the fact of the matter is that we have the world's largest regional agreement, and as you have mentioned, it's a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which means that it goes beyond just the free trade agreement. So you will see that there are provisions in the 20 articles that RCEP has. There are provisions of e-commerce, provisions of common rules of origin, provisions of attracting FDI from the region. So it goes beyond just mere market access into services trade, into investment, cross-border trade facilitation. So all these makes it a comprehensive economic partnership, which is broader than free trade agreement. Since it is the world's largest bloc of this type, and you have China over there, you have Japan over there, and the ASEAN itself. So I think that it has great prospects, and it will be the kid on the block to watch over the next decades.
Dr. Rahman, let me pick up on a couple of quick things about RCEP. First off, as you mentioned, and absolutely rightly so, the countries that RCEP has brought in, ASEAN has brought in to form RCEP, with each of these countries, ASEAN already had a free trade agreement. Yeah. So in terms of trade in goods and trade in services, they're saying now that it will basically be a very minimal effect in terms of GDP enhancement for the region, which experts are now saying is going to be about 0.2%. That's one. So they're saying it's more of a political clout rather than an economic clout, so to speak, number one. And number two is, yes, it's comprehensive, but not near anywhere EU is. So one of the areas where RCEP is going to lag way behind EU is movement of labor, which, as you know, in RCEP, there is on one hand, there is Singapore, and then on the other hand, there is Laos and Cambodia and Myanmar, for example. So that's number two. And the third point that I would like to mention is, I'm sure I don't know if you have had a chance to look at the agreement itself, which is over 500 pages and loads of annexes. So experts are also saying that, when you have that many annexes, it's not good. However, what I'm trying to say here is it still needs ratification over the next coming months from 6 ASEAN countries and 3 non-ASEAN countries for it to move forward. Just quick reflection of the fact that it's, yes, comprehensive, but not quite near as what EU is. So just your reflections on some of the things I mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your skepticism, but let me elaborate on some of the points. One is that, yes, it is a 500-page document. The US MCA, US, Mexico, and Canada agreement is 5,000 pages. And the other thing is that they have not made the document public. So many of the specialists that I'm seeing that they're commenting, they haven't seen the main document. Perhaps it will be made public very soon. But what we understand that the 20 chapters that are there, they will have common rules of origin, which is a major factor in facilitating intra-regional trade. This is number one. Yes, RCEP is not European Union in the sense that if we have hierarchy of regional cooperation, then you have, for example, sectoral cooperation, any type of regional trading arrangement. Then you have a free trade area. Then you have a customs union, which is a free trade area, but with common customs tariff, region-wise, common. And then you have common market, right, where there is movement of not only goods and services, but also labor, as you have rightly mentioned. So RCEP is still a lot of way behind European Union, but it's a step forward than mere FTA. So it's somewhere, between the economic union and the free trade agreement. So this is number one. Number two is that, what will be the incremental contribution to the GDP growth? We will have to see. But my understanding is that it will be quite significant because it's just not trade. If they can attract investment, and if you have common rules of origin, if you have common standards, e-commerce, where the future economic activities will lie. So if you have disciplines over there, then obviously the economic benefits will be to that extent facilitated. And number three, obviously, there is a political economy, you are right. If you take bilaterally, China has a lot of acrimonious issues with Japan, with Australia, etc., etc. So there will also be a peace dividend, which is perhaps intangible, but also it can translate into economic benefits for all. And also, I think that RCEP has mentioned that the window for India remains open. For other countries, after ratification, after 18 months, other countries can also theoretically can also join. So they will have to start their negotiation. But for India, they've kept the doors open. I think as Indian productivity goes up and their strengths multiply, they will be also confident and might also join. If that be the case, then obviously the contribution to the GDP growth, etc., will also change. And I think that it could become a game changer as we go forward in the 21st century.
You're right about the trade tensions, recent trade tensions between China and Australia, with China slapping some tariffs on typical Australian exports. So now they're saying through RCEP, hopefully those will get eased out. And then again, of course, historical tensions between Japan and China get eased out as well. Now I'm going to come in the next few minutes. I'm going to concentrate on Bangladesh. Okay. Now, as you know, Bangladesh has done, Dr. Rahman, we have talked about this, has done so very well in so many arenas. But in one area where we have really lacked is forging any kind of preferential trade agreement or free trade agreements and what have you. Now, once again, Dr. Rahman, I'm going to set a little bit of a premise real quickly. When we were talking about India, obviously India, when it went ahead and first it did goods free trade agreement with ASEAN, and then later on services agreement. What India saw was a lopsided trade imbalance having done that. And with China as well, it has a very lopsided relationship with a big deficit. So does Bangladesh. So how does this come about? Obviously, our industries are not at a level where they can compete with some of the other established industries. So hence comes in the infant industry, the protectionism, and all of that stuff. It is very important to know, we just cannot just go ahead and have a free trade agreement if our industries are not ready. So that's a very critical component of what and what not that can be done. So my suggestion is, Dr. Mustafiz, that for our industries, we need to have a time-bound schedule. Okay, we're going to give you tariff protection, but we cannot give it to you forever. It needs to be time-bound. So our industries then gear up and understand that competition is going to be coming in at some point. We got to have some roadmap. I somehow feel that we do not have that roadmap. As such, whenever we talk about doing any kind of agreements and stuff like that, local businesses actually put pressure on the government. And the reason why it just doesn't get done. Your views on that?
Okay, no, you are right that we don't have bilateral free trade agreement, but we are part of the SAFTA, the South Asian Free Trade Agreement. We are part of the BIMSTEC Free Trade Agreement, which is negotiating. We have 7 countries over there. 4 of these are from the SAARC region: India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and also Sri Lanka, in fact 5. And then you have Myanmar and Thailand from the ASEAN in the BIMSTEC FTA. What we don't have is a bilateral agreement. Only recently, as you know, with Bhutan, we have done our first bilateral free trade agreement. So that was a sort of a test case, maybe testing the waters, because Bhutan is not a major trading partner of Bangladesh. But I think that our negotiators had some experience through the process. But you are very right that we will have to prepare ourselves when we go for bilateral free trade agreement. For example, at one point of time, we may like to think of going for some type of bilateral free trade agreement with RCEP, for example, then we will have to do our homework. Even within RCEP, the least developed countries like Cambodia, like Lao PDR, they have a two-track policy. For example, in terms of trade liberalization or customs liberalization, e-commerce, they have been given more time than other countries. So I think that it is very natural that, that if in a bilateral partnership there is a country which is at the lower rung of economic development, there can be two track. And that is also there in many, even in SAFTA, the 4 LDCs, their trade liberalization plan and everything is much slower than the 3 developing country members in the SAFTA. But having said that, obviously, these are based on reciprocity. You will have to also give if you want to get something. So I would say that Bangladesh should keep its options open, but also take the preparatory steps, because we will also be expected to open up our economy. And the same apprehension that if a country like India has vis-a-vis RCEP countries, Bangladesh should have that type of apprehension manifold, because our economy is relatively weaker. So obviously, domestic industries, their capacities, withstanding competition from imported goods and services, all these will be very important. And I think that one critical element which we discussed in one of our earlier programs was the investment hub. I think that that is where really the crux of the matter is. If we want to have trade connectivity, we will have to have investment connectivity. And I think that the current initiatives in the areas of transport connectivity, regional, attracting FDI from the region, special economic zones that we are building, all these will become very, very important to give us the strength to withstand the competitive pressure, and then go for this type of bilateral agreement. So a lot of challenges, but preparedness is the name of the game.
If I hear you correctly, Dr. Rahman, yes, we have challenges, but we need to nevertheless move ahead, because there is no alternative to having free trade, free access, and that's how economies grow, and that's how prosperity is gained. In any event, SAFTA, as you know, of course, we're aware of SAFTA, but we have seen very little trade come out of SAFTA, as you know. That's one. I'm very enthused about BIMSTEC, by the way, which is on its way, but still a long ways from fruition. But I am very enthused about BIMSTEC, because that's a true overlap between, South Asia and ASEAN through the overlap of 2 countries, as you know. So I'm enthused about that. So that could perhaps be our right window. We should work on the progress that has been made in the last few years, and especially because BIMSTEC's secretariat happens to be in Dhaka as well, and was manned by Bangladeshi the last few years, as you very well know. But in any event, lots to be worked on, Dr. Rahman, but it is good to know that in our neck of the woods, through RCEP, first through ASEAN, through RCEP, we're leading and paving the way forward for the entire world to see. As the EU is breaking up, we're forging ahead, we're moving ahead, we're forming closer ties. And I believe personally that that is the way forward. The other thing I liked very much is your 2-track view on how you can perhaps, when when there are economies at different levels and stuff like that, there is room provided for the weaker ones to catch up. I'd like to thank you so very much for joining us. And again, I would hope that you're a very busy person, but every now and then you find time for our audience as well. I'd like to thank our audience at the same time. It's such a pleasure having Dr. Rahman, and look forward to having him many more times. So I would wish for you to stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next session. Bye-bye.